Welcome to another conversation here at the Dakota. I'm Jonathan Starr. This time we are diving into someone has joined us, Andrew Nyhus, formerly, and I didn't say I was going to say this beforehand, so I might get in trouble here, formerly executive director at the Indy GOP, but you stepped away from that.
Yes.
Tell the world that it was something controversial.
Oh, it was terrible. It was totally unlivable. No, that's a great job. What an awesome privilege to be in a position where you have a lot of influence, but
Mhm.
it's administrative. And so, if you're even-handed, that influence really shouldn't mean much. It's
Right.
mostly I get to hear different perspectives and then, you know, share those perspectives. A lot of what I did is just my natural tendency, which is to convene people. So I
Okay.
can say, oh, if they're mad at the other, and I can just say, I think you all have a misunderstanding,
Yeah.
and convene them. But uh, other than that, I mean, I just care so much about educational freedom, just overall,
Right.
and I've been working on that, paid and unpaid, for many years now.
Wow.
And and so I just couldn't, in that administrative role, I really couldn't move, as I didn't have the latitude to have the influence I wanted to have. I try to take my responsibilities seriously, um, and that just meant to steward that administrative kind of unbiased position. I have a strong position on this, and I want to share it,
Right.
and I want to be helpful, most of all, helpful to the legislature.
Makes
This
sense.
this allowed me to do that, to leave the party and and start advocating full time.
Sounds like you have ethics. So ethics, you actually stand on some sort of ethics. So you had to leave the party so that way you could not have a crossing of those ethics and create a dirty area.
Absolutely, and the same applied to running for office. I didn't particularly want to run for office,
Mhm.
but when nobody ran, I thought that's a shame, and
Right.
I submitted my name and then withdrew it because there
Yeah.
just wasn't an ethical way to run and administer the party.
Yeah. No, makes complete sense.
I'm a pretty
Well,
boring guy that way.
yeah. And that's a good place to be boring. That's a good place to be boring. So the subject of today's conversation centers around this school choice, and there's a couple bills in the legislature that touches on this. And so we get to dive into that. And interestingly, this is one of those topics that actually pulls a lot of testimony. Sometimes you'll have these bills that come in that you think are going to be controversial, and there's not very much testimony, and then you have something like daylight savings time that comes before, and you find that there's a lot of testimony. And these education savings accounts are one of those that drew in a lot of testimony. Let's start here though. Why have you dedicated and committed part of your life to this, that you're so passionate that you would step away from the Republican Party, um, which seems like a pretty good job, and really dedicate your focus on this? Why is it important to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. The bills that get a lot of attention, sometimes they're the least important. Things like turning your license plate black.
Right. Yeah.
It's when there are bills that are tens and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right.
This is one that is both draws a lot of attention and has the potential to be truly transformative. I mean, I'm I'm not interested. I've been around legislating long enough. I know that you'd never get your way, and it probably won't help you personally. It'll whatever changes, it needs to make sense for 50 and 100 years.
Yeah.
And this is something where we have a marketplace, we have free enterprise, we have many providers and consumers making choices, and it's making the world better. It's making everyone richer. And then we have this centralized, top-down, total control education system that doesn't allow for that innovation to happen. And at this point, we've seen the outcome. And I'm not dogging on the public schools right now. I'm saying
Right.
we've seen the outcomes in other states that allow for that competition. And it's all good, all of it. It's good money. It's good everything. But most importantly, it's good for the kids. So if we have children who are more fulfilled, who we tap into the potential that's in them instead of leaving it locked up there, then we're going to have a better society. We're going to have a richer society. And most important to me is they're just going to have more fulfilling lives.
Right. Yeah. In the testimony, somebody mentioned, and I don't remember the name, and we don't need to address their name, but something about like these are people that when you invest in them, they also contribute to society. So just because they go to a private school or they're homeschooled doesn't mean that the state should just not financially care about them. Which is an interesting argument in this whole deal, but it is true that like we are building society here. Do you feel that the proficiency rates, because that's something that gets a ton of attention in North Dakota, is the proficiency rates in education? Do you feel like they are a little bit lacking? Is this something where perhaps school choice might help with that because people aren't getting the schooling that would help them do the best that they could?
Yeah, so that's the most of the arguments center on this. What, will we increase test scores, or will you leave kids behind in the public schools? Yep. There's good news all around. Okay, so I mean, imagine you sing in a choir, and 1/3 of the members don't want to be there.
Yeah,
it's just not going to sound as good. So when people have their preference, of course, program participants, if you participate in a school choice program like an education savings account or an ESA, those students do improve. Okay, their test scores improve, their educational attainment improves. But of course, that's to be expected. They went somewhere that worked for them, right? And that you'd expect that to happen. There is a little dip in many cases because they're adjusting to a new school. It's a new concept for them. But the public school students, when there's proximal, meaningful competition, their test scores also improve.
Oh,
interesting. And it makes sense.
Right.
And that's one of the most studied aspects of school choice, and it's not hypothetical. The arguments that I make are, we don't have to wonder what will happen. Right. Outcomes for public school students improve, and they're for whatever reason, they have their school of preference.
Right. No, that's really interesting. So first off, though, you said that the scores increase. Now, some people get concerned about homeschool and private school, that perhaps the material that's being used is not as quality as public school. But what we're talking about with these scores are standardized tests that are being performed, correct?
Yeah, there are a lot of different tests. The non-public schools prefer other tests usually. Sometimes, they can take whatever test they want in other states, but yes, things like the NAEP scores, those are standardized. We have methods of comparing, so it's not a question of rigor. I know that there's often this argument that the private schools, they cherry pick the best students. Right. There are even ways to do a multivariate analysis and account for all those things. It shouldn't be surprising. Those schools have to perform for the parents, or the parents will stop paying them.
Yeah.
So they tend to be, they perform well academically.
That's the thing that's interesting about the argument is a private school, theoretically, if you're not careful, you can become more concerned about money than whatever, because you have to pay the bills. Like, it would be a natural thing that would happen. I'm not trying to take a shot at private schools. I'm just saying it could be a natural thing that would happen. So obviously you need the kids to do well, so that way the parents continue, and you also need people to enroll. So you're trying to play both sides of that argument, you would think, in order to be a sustainable institution. But you mentioned also that the public school students, that they begin to improve, their scores begin to improve as the school choice becomes more prominent. So why? Is that because the classroom sizes shrink a little bit, so maybe better attention is able to be given to students, or how does that happen?
Yeah, it's so that's a question that's being asked, and
Yeah,
you know, I don't
it's really hard to
think
answer
that it's
that one.
kind of every factor. So you have like, is it shrinking class sizes? Well, it's not a ton of people who leave,
Right.
but that could be a factor.
Hmm.
There's also teachers benefit from school choice because, um, I mean, talk to lots of public school teachers. Many of them tried the private or the non-public system, and like, I just couldn't make ends meet. So
Okay.
now teachers are afforded choice,
Yeah.
and so you have the
Mhm.
teachers in the school who want to be there, and the
Right.
students who want to be there. There's more of a market fit, and um, yeah, people, families, and especially students, they disengage from their school if they disengage from their whole educational process if it's not something that they want.
Right. I'm going to throw that back at you. Okay.
Yeah,
And this is going to be my first actual main question. So it does give teachers choice, but also is acclaimed that there is a teacher shortage
yeah.
in North Dakota. So is this going to create a problem for public schools to be able to have enough teachers in order to be able to support? If I mean, obviously, right now it's working somewhat. There's currently a teacher shortage. But if more private schools were to suddenly be able to come into place because of this,
Hmm.
is that going to cause problems there?
Boy, I could hit this so many ways. So I mean, there's a labor shortage, but
Yeah,
yes, there's a teacher shortage.
right.
Um, in North Dakota, we are one of 8 states that require non-public schools to be approved by our state Department of Education. We
That's a
are
really
the
good point.
singular state. We're the only state that requires all non-public school teachers to have the very same credentials as public school teachers. Okay, so I mean, it's the meme with the 2 red buttons.
Yeah,
You know what I'm talking about? Like, okay, we have a teacher shortage. This teacher credential is really, really important. You
right.
can't be a great teacher without it.
Yeah,
And then on the other hand, you have, so if that's the case, then you should only want certified teachers. I'm here saying maybe we should let the public schools have all the credentialed teachers and say
right.
we'll just take what's left over in the private schools.
Right.
They don't, and so there isn't evidence that having a teacher certification makes you a better teacher. So we can address that with some deregulation. Of course, it's separate from the school choice issue, but and I'm not saying that education that they get has no value. I'm just saying let's deregulate the non-public end of things, like every other state, and and then you'd have more teachers. For example, say you want to open a classical school um, in North Dakota. I mean, find me a North Dakotan or someone who's willing to move to North Dakota, who is credentialed in North Dakota,
Right.
without reciprocity, by the way, and who knows Latin and Greek. Like, find me that teacher. I need 10 of them. I need that's a
That'd be
problem. Yeah.
difficult. That'd be
Hmm.
very difficult. I was schooled for a lot of my education, the first 8 years of my education in a state called Oregon, in a private school that did not have the strict rules that we're talking about right here. And it's interesting to me. So, and some would say that my education suffers. Others would say it's all right. I finished high school in a homeschool environment. So it's possible to be done, as you said, because we're like one of the only states that actually has this rule. But what's interesting that I want to ask you about is it fair that the government, the North Dakota government says you have to have certified teachers in your private schools, and there's actually decently strict rules for homeschooling as well that you got to be following and have in place, but that they're only going to fund the public schools. So it's almost like, yeah, I'll let you answer rather than give my opinion.
Well, yeah, it's okay. Um, I want to hit the Oregon thing too. So I would call it an unfunded mandate, but many people aren't there, right? I call it, there's a concept, the shock of realization.
Mm-hmm.
So when people red pill on this issue,
Yep.
there's, sometimes it happens all at once. Wait a second. We've, who gave the government this authority in the first place? And like, I have to give the government my children, or I'm guilty of a crime. And then people say, well, we have school choice in North Dakota, which of course we do not. But they'll say, oh, we have school choice. You can choose private school if you want to. It's like, yeah, I could have flown to Minot for this interview in a helicopter.
Yep.
I just, I have to buy a helicopter first. And that's so contemptuous to families who really can't afford anything else. And just one thing on Oregon. Oregon has come a long way.
Yeah.
Because Oregon lost a Supreme Court case in the 1920s, early 20s, because Oregon banned private schools and homeschool.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court argument, striking down that law, says children are not primarily creatures of the state. You don't own my kids. You don't own them.
So in a way, if you have to have teachers that are certified by the state, then perhaps if you had the right attorney and you had the right judge, that might also get in trouble as well, because you're still requiring the state to be involved in the education process.
Yeah, I mean, we talk, they keep saying, well, my roof is leaking, your roof should be leaking too. Like, regulate them more. Yeah. I hear that argument a lot. The private schools have no accountability. I say, well, there's a difference between transparency and accountability. Transparency, I put on paper the things that I'm doing in here. If you're a public school parent, I'd encourage you, maybe ask an administrator, ask your child's teacher if you can sit in the classroom and audit, just observe, see how that goes for you. But
you're saying see how that goes for you because you anticipate the public school saying you can't do that?
I think some might. And, but I think more of the non-public schools will, because they want you to come in and see, and see if you want to buy the service that they're offering.
Right.
So yeah, it is in North Dakota. It's hard to make a case that we have any non-public schools. That we have really regulated private schools that look a lot like the public schools, but they might add chapel. It's just very narrow guardrails on what they're allowed to do.
So do you think that, and this isn't directly in line with either of the bills that we're going to be referencing or have referenced today, but do you think that if the regulation was just taking off teachers, for private schools, that in some ways that would be almost, maybe not fully enough, but almost enough to begin to allow school choice to happen a little bit more, and that theoretically either more private schools could open, or there would be a drop in the tuition rates potentially?
Mm-hmm. I don't anticipate a drop in tuition. I'm not speaking for the non-public schools, but I don't anticipate the cost of everything is rising.
Yeah.
We would still, in that case of deregulating teacher certification, we would still have every school has to be approved. In Fargo, there was a school, part of Acton Academy, which is a proven franchise, incredible outcomes that they get for their students. It's a very sort of laissez-faire Montessori kind of thing that has a very particular philosophy, and they weren't allowed to open in North Dakota. They were not approved, and they're open now in Moorhead, just across the river. We could have another school in North Dakota, but we don't, because we regulate them too much.
Yeah. So if you got rid of that, even loosening the rules on approving schools. Basically, the point of it is if we make it easier for private schools to open and be able to be sustainable. I mean, I know at the school that I went to growing up, the cost of tuition was very cheap because it was sponsored a lot by the church that was there, and even hearing some testimony that even happens with the private institutions that are here. But I think that, I mean, I know I know probably 10, 15, 20 kids that are being homeschooled, and potentially if there was a private school that was something that they were comfortable with, that they would look at those. And I think there would be a lot of homeschoolers that would look at private schools that were connected to their church or part of the communities that they're involved in if private schooling was more accessible. And in some ways, I think it is healthier. I think it is healthier in some ways. Homeschooling is great, but if you had a good, solid private school, I think it's healthy. I think it'd be something that'd be good for North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
I mean, homeschool, private school, we're thinking of education. We talk a lot about schooling, but we use the word education. And I do my best to draw that distinction. I slip up all the time and make that mistake. But as we think about education, that's the aim. That's our policy aim, right? Is to have an educated public. When they make this argument that maybe I shouldn't be paying for my school taxes because I'd never had any children, or my children are grown and gone. It's like, no, you benefit from living in an educated public.
Okay.
And that is educating a child is everywhere and always a public purpose, whether it's in a government controlled system or not. So that's also, there's precedent for that, even in North Dakota. So educating children is a public purpose.
Right. It's something that we all need to contribute to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we all benefit from.
Yes, absolutely. I can agree with this. Okay. So let's go ahead, and we've talked about it. I even was able to talk about homeschooling, all that stuff that I'm passionate about. But let's switch to gears a little bit and talk about a couple of these bills. Two of them floating around right now. One is 1540, House Bill 1540, and the other one is 2400. Very two unique approaches. One costs more money than the other. I'm going to ask you an open-ended question that you're not going to want to answer, but what's the favorite one? What's the one that we should look at? Or is it, should we talk and have these attributes from each combined into a new bill, or what should happen here?
So I'm not someone who's ideological. Like, I don't insist on having my way. I've been around legislating long enough. I'm interested in getting it done.
Yep.
Okay. It's been a long time. People have been working on getting some sort of educational freedom in North Dakota for 15 years, and we've got very little to show for it. So I'm interested in which one can get done, and is it durable? Can it survive, constitutional scrutiny, like a legal challenge? And you always have to consider the challenge of could it end up on the ballot, because there are, the teachers union and the establishment of the public schools will do anything to prevent this. And so that's my interest. I don't have a particular bill. I could, there are trade-offs to everything. I'm sort of a Thomas Sowell, like I think in those terms of everything has a trade-off. Yeah. And the political aspects are the hardest to weigh because they're not quantitative. Now, of course, bills can change and will change throughout, right up to that finish line. Right. And what we want to see is optimal. If I could optimize one thing, it would be choice. Right? That does it allow more families to make a choice that suits them? Because there's the current layout of like 90% of everyone goes to public school, 8% or 9% go to private school, 5-ish% they homeschool. If you ask those families what they prefer, it's way different. It's like a third of them wish that they could be in a private school, and 14% wish that they could homeschool. It's just so different. I want them at the margins to have that choice.
Right.
So, the higher the ESA allocation can be, the better. But it also has to be politically viable.
Right.
So the bills are the main difference between them is that the Senate bill 2400 includes an ESA, an education savings account, for public school students. So in addition to the $11,074, that's what the per pupil payment is based on, we probably spend somewhere between $16,000 and $19,000 per student per year in North Dakota on education. You could make a case that it's more when you start considering adjacent costs and things that, money that still flows into the school system. But okay, for that let's just aim low. Let's say it's $16,000. I can, in an education savings account, put $8,000 in there, put half as much in, and now a family really does have the option that previously couldn't afford another option, now might consider it.
Right.
So having that dollar number be as high as it can be, and then having it just as close to universal as you can get. Who's allowed to participate? Now the catch is, very often these programs, they start out with a smaller number, or with means testing, or excluding certain groups, and then over time it's just, this is only fair if we allow everyone in. That's 16 to 20,000. We're spending that on the rich kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
As long as the rich kids might do it. Like we are subsidizing, we're fully funding the education of rich kids. I'm not like a classist person, but your argument is so absurd.
Mm-hmm.
When we're already spending twice as much or 4 times as much on the rich kids.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because public schools, it really doesn't matter who's going to be attending there. So, do you think that there would be a concern from these bills that, and I think some homeschool parents would have this, and some that are going to be putting their kids in private schools are going to have this, that there's strings attached, that the government's going to be very much controlling what they can do, probably more affecting homeschoolers, that the government's going to be affecting what they can teach their kids and all that. Is this something that a homeschool parent should be concerned about?
I mean, marginally, you should be, like, if you're taking taxpayer funds, there will be some accountability that just follows. So, but it's limited to this program. So the first point is, it's an opt-in program. You don't have to take the funds. And even if you take the funds, so say you opt in, I'm now a participant, fill certain forms, and then give certain assurances, and then show your work to some extent. Right. Let's minimize that, of course. Let's not have undue. There are lots of ways to educate that haven't been, that people here just aren't familiar with. But okay, you opt in, you do that compliance. And even if you opt in, that's not the government telling you what you can or cannot teach your children.
Right.
It's the government telling you, we will reimburse you for these things. And it's not actually a reimbursement, but if you want to teach them something weird that the government doesn't like, do it, but they're not going to pay for it.
Right.
That's so. And then the third point is, they already have that authority. You are being regulated, and if they, on a whim, decide that you need more regulation, they can attach those strings without the funds.
Yeah, it'll be passed faster than one of these ESA bills.
It would. Yeah, it'd be a lot easier to pass that.
So, talk about this, like SB 2400, Senate Bill 2400. There's actually a marketplace that would be created, where you'd be able to go through and select the thing that you want to spend part of your education savings account towards, whether that's a STEM camp, whether that's, I'm sure sometimes, I don't know everything that's going on in this marketplace, but books or whatever, basically anything you bought from there would be government approved, and you wouldn't have to worry about strings being attached to that. And then if you want to buy this other education, then you'd be fine. And I think this is an interesting question that comes up with it, and we'll start here on it. And that, does this cross a line where suddenly religion starts in education suddenly becomes funded?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that
funding
line is
religion and
crossed?
education. Okay, so first, the whole separation of church and state. I'm going there. We'll do it here.
That we should do a podcast just on the separation of church and state. That would be a very engaging podcast.
I'm no historian. I mean, but that was a letter from. It's nowhere in our founding documents. Nowhere. It's a letter from Thomas Jefferson to a Baptist minister saying there ought to be a separate. The minister was saying, "I'm concerned you're going to regulate me," and then Thomas Jefferson replies with, "There ought to be a separation of church and state." Okay, so that's the genesis of that idea. When I worked in the U.S. Senate, I had the incredible privilege of being mentored by Chaplain Barry Black, retired Rear Admiral Barry Black, chaplain of the Senate. There's a prayer room just off the rotunda. Yeah. I mean, we have chaplains throughout the military. All of the common schools, that's what they used to call the public schools, virtually all of them were Protestant at the outset. They taught Bible. You go all the way back to the beginning of, well, this would predate the Union, but back in like 1640s, you had the Puritan, I think it was in Massachusetts, the Satan Ye Old Deluder Act.
Okay.
So they hired a teacher and sent him around to make sure your kids could read the Bible so that you couldn't be fooled by Satan. I mean, that's where that compulsory education idea comes from.
Right.
So yeah, we're funding religion. Last thing, sorry, Jonathan. Last thing on this. There's a Blaine Amendment in the North Dakota Constitution. It says you can't spend money collected for the purpose of public school on a sectarian school.
Right.
That, of course, had an anti-Catholic beginning. But the reason it's in North Dakota's Constitution is that it was a requirement. It was in the Enabling Act. We couldn't get into the Union of States unless we included a Blaine Amendment. That's why it's there. It was struck down in 2018, Espinoza versus Montana. It was struck down again definitively in 2022 in Carson v. Macon. It's dead. It's nothing. You don't have to have a program for school choice. If you do, you cannot exclude any school on the basis of religion because you'd be discriminating on the basis of religion, which of course is unconstitutional.
Right. Yeah.
I'm done. All right.
It seems like the whole separation of church and state has just turned into separation of Christianity. It's just it seems like where a lot of the conversation revolves around at this point. Because more specifically, the question comes up: is this going to fund if there's a school that starts about that their religion is based off of satanic type of ideologies? Will the state begin to fund that? Which I'll let you answer, but it sounds like it goes back to this whole deal where, I mean, if you're homeschooling, it could be that. Maybe that's the curriculum you use for homeschooling, but the state is not going to directly fund that. They're going to have to fund the part where you're teaching them arithmetic. That's where the money's going to go.
I suppose if our society devolves to the point that there's a market and you can operate a school like that and there's demand for it,
right?
Hypothetically, yes. I mean, yeah, you would fund a Hindi school or whatever that family wants, because it's education. That's why, again, separating education and schooling. Education is more than just learning stuff to use later. It's not just utilitarian. I talked at the beginning about fulfillment. I mean, knowing things about yourself and knowing things about your spirituality, that's going to increase your fulfillment. It's part of your education. Character formation, having the opportunity to go out and discover your gifts. What are you
Yeah.
good at? Can I develop those in this
Right.
in this education that I'm getting? Can I develop those gifts into marketable skills? And homeschoolers like you know, you start things. You have
Yeah.
that feeling of I can do it because I've
Mhm.
done other things. There's this great program called Let Grow, and they
Okay.
go into every kind of school, public or private or anywhere, and you just the whole it's a program put together by Lenore Skenazy, the world's worst mom.
Huh.
She's the one that sent her kid on the subway and got arrested.
Okay.
Like he's a 9-year old and he went on the New York subway.
Yeah.
The whole program is, hey kid, do something you've never done before
Hmm.
that grown-ups do, but do it without the help of a grown-up.
Okay.
That's the whole thing.
Right.
And they, for me, I was 13. I wasn't a farm kid. I wanted to be. I got on the tractor. They left me out there and just like, get this done. There was no training involved. And I had to jumpstart that tractor in a way that I learned to never do, because it can make the tractor rear back and then it runs you over, and it's happened. And
Yeah.
I thought, I know what needs to be done, and I know I'm not supposed to do it, but it'll be so embarrassing if I call for help.
Right.
So I called for help, and the little radio couldn't reach. And I
Doesn't
jump
work.
started that thing I had shiny new pliers on my hip, and I
Oh
stuck it
yeah.
and shorted out the starter.
Yeah.
That thing fired up, and I mean, that was my bar mitzvah. That
Right.
was, to me, it was like, I can do things on
Yeah.
my own, and
That's huge.
everyone needs that.
Right.
Everyone needs to see for yourself what you're made of.
No, this is really good point. This is something that needs to happen more, and you can even bring in to this conversation that kind of goes outside of the scope of what we're actually talking about. But when you bring in like electronics and all that we're allowing to get into our kids, and some of it's good. Like if your kid's graduating high school and he doesn't know how to operate a computer, or she doesn't know how to operate a computer, that's a problem in the day and age that we live in. Like they need to be able to type on a keyboard, I would say, and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we have taken it so far the other way, where we've killed the creativity, the ability for a kid to get in a jump started tractor at age 13. I would have failed that.
Well, you need a benevolent, someone who knows you in particular
Yeah.
and what's going to work for you. That's
Right.
who needs to be making that decision for you.
Right.
The phone thing, I mean, you could take any aspect of education and apply market principles.
Right.
In the existence of school choice, how does that work out? Well, some schools would have a absolutely no phones policy. Another
Mhm.
school might be innovating, like, you're going to use your phone, we're going to put an app on it that blocks certain things,
Yeah.
and we're going to use our phones all day long for, a discussion. It's just a living thing that's always going.
Right.
There's, what is it? Synthesis school is entirely AI driven,
Wow.
and that's for
Yeah.
the children of the SpaceX engineers.
Okay.
That's Synthesis School. Anna
Yeah.
Fabrega on Twitter. Check her out. Ad Astra is Elon Musk's school that he started for his kids.
Okay.
And I mean, it's just, there's innovation happening
Right.
everywhere else. But people will solve the phone thing based on where they, that a parent will make a choice that's good for their
Right.
own kids.
Yep. No, that's a great point, because the correct rebuttal to that is, like you said, like there's a lot of good that technology does when it's harnessed correctly. The problem is when you give free reign, that, just like anything, it's a bad deal, because we're humans, and that's what we're talking about is the kids. What are we going to do about this school choice? So in my mind, I feel like we've pretty comprehensively covered this topic. I feel like we've really added a couple of different views on it. So I want to turn the floor over to you for a moment. And is there anything specific that you feel is very important on this topic as someone is considering it and working on forming their own opinion on where they would stand?
I mean, mostly I love to hear the objections. I love to hear what people say can't work, won't work. I have answers for all those things.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say I have answers. There are answers because it's been extensively studied. The fiscal effects, it turns out it's good for overall state budgets. It's also good for public schools because they tend to claim those funds that are saved through school choice. It costs so much less to educate children outside the government system.
Weird.
But to me, like once you address the objection, even if you do it satisfactorily, it's like there are 70 studies of the fiscal effects. 68 of them say it's good for public schools. They'll come and they'll say, and another thing, right? The question is, where should the control lie?
Right.
You, as a parent, have a vested interest in your children's fulfillment, in their future success, how you define it. You might not even agree with what the state defines as education. You're a free American.
Right.
So who should have that control? And ultimately, it's beneficial for the public school's finances. It's beneficial, more importantly, for the public school students and their outcomes as you see them, you being those interests. Maybe I don't care about test scores.
Yeah.
That's not, but you're doing better on those things. I'm playing your game and I'm winning. I'm helping you, and it makes sense. And we have a very Republican controlled legislature. There are almost no states. There might be one or two left that have the full Republican control that don't have this yet. Who should have control? And I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think that it's, the parents know best, that all the parents making decisions for all the children is better than, a committee or a body in the legislature making that choice. And it just takes a little bit of humility to say, yes, I don't know best from here in Bismarck. They know best out there.
Yeah. Well, you like to bring in these other topics that would be rabbit trails, but they'd be very interesting, such as we have a Republican-controlled legislature and the conversations that can be had around that. Because there's a lot, and you know them better than anybody. But I think this is one of those telling topics when you begin to dive into it and you hear the answers and the conversations that happen about it. It does seem like it's time for something to happen here. But I really appreciate you coming on, because we're at the point of the interview where I'm starting to get opinions forming, and so I got to stop. Otherwise, people are going to hear from me rather than you. So it was great having you come on. Really appreciate a very good conversation. I think that we covered a lot of ground. Any last words you want to add?
No, I appreciate it. Please open your mind to the possibility that even if you're employed by the public schools. I mean, this can benefit teachers.
Right.
Freedom is so good for everyone. So please just consider that. I guess I do out there in the public. I think that the parity argument that, that if there's a public school ESA, that it should be the same as a private school ESA. I just don't see how 16,000 plus another 500 is fair with someone else getting 1,000 or 4,000 or 8,000. Like it's not unfair, or it is unfair, but it's in favor of the public school. So I'd love to see that argument just die, that it's not equal somehow. Only a market can be fair. People acting in their self-interest and just making decisions based on, do they allow phones? Is it 10 miles or 25 miles from me? Is it, those factors? No, that's try to separate education and schooling, because you can get schooled without being educated, and you can get educated without school.
Absolutely. No, that's a really great point. Great way to end. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you to everybody that watched this podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, become part of the Dakota community. Let us know if there's other topics like this that you want to cover or that you would like to have covered, because we want to do that for you. Thank you for watching this podcast. Have a great day.